beautiful golden pumpkin, super chic. Actually, it's more of a white pumpkin with gold accents, super chic. I love it. I can't wait for it to be on my wall. And I'm gonna share my screen so you can see what I'm working on. Just a moment ago, I told everyone to go ahead and get started on painting their black background. That will be our first step. And we have to wait for that to dry before we can move forward. So that's what we're all doing. We're just painting a black background. All right, I've got all the excess off. It should dry a lot better now. Just smoothing out those lines. And I'm gonna make sure I have all my edges painted. It's gonna get super messy. All right, so I'm gonna set this over here in front of my fan so it can dry. And I'll show you guys how I think the best way we can go about making our pumpkins will be. Okay, so we've got our pumpkin and it has a general circle shape. So I'm gonna take my pencil and I'm gonna kind of just draw. Doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a little oblong, but just a circle. I'm gonna darken my line so y'all can see it a little better. So that kind of gives us just the general outline to fill. Next we'll start with our stem. We'll bring it in. And we're gonna sketch this onto the canvas too. So this isn't gonna be just freehand. But I wanted to let y'all know kind of what we're up against before we just dive into it. That way y'all can follow along a lot easier. And then from here, once we have our stem in place, we can start figuring out where we want the pumpkin humps to be. Is that the bumpy part? I don't quite know what they're called. But by drawing this outer circle, it kind of gives us a guide. And we know not to stray too far outside that line. But we can. So does that make sense? Kind of how we're going to tackle it? By drawing the outer circle, it helped my mind figure out how to make the pumpkin kind of 3D, bring it out of the painting. So that's what we're going to do on our canvas, and then we'll just add our leaves. got a line that goes off this way. So if you have your canvas painted and it's black and it's dry, if you want to go ahead and start sketching, go for it. And remember, this is going on your wall, so you make it look the way you want it to look. It's going to be beautiful regardless. I'm going to move this up over here so it's still in view, and I'm just going to sketch it again. There we go. All right. Are we good? Are y'all done sketching? Almost? Cool. I'm going to finish up this line real quick. And we'll break out the paints and get started. I'm going to adjust my pointer just a little bit more because the line up here pulls the eye this way, and I want it to be a little more heavy on this side to balance out the picture. So I'm going to make these bumps over here a lot bigger, and it just kind of fills up that negative space I have right here. And all of these pencil marks are going to get covered up, so you don't have to worry about erasing them unless you just want to. I'm erasing the ones that I don't want to follow, so I don't get confused. Okay, so we're going to need several varying shades of gray. And y'all know me, I like to mix paint. And hopefully I don't run across another paint bubble like I did last time. There's my black paint. I'm going to start with black this time. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I thought maybe I would use that paint well like I did last time, but I'm just going to use my paper plate because then it works like a paint palette. And if I want to pull a little bit more of this color and a little bit more of this color, I can just blend it all on the paint instead of in the wells. So I've got my black paint on my palette. I'm going to put some white paint. I'm going to mix this first one half and half.
Okay.
Mix those together. Out of this half and half ratio that I made, I'm going to fill up my paintbrush, and then I'm going to mix into the second puddle of white that I have. And when that one's nice and mixed, I'm going to use the paint that's in my paintbrush and take it into this third puddle of white that I have. And I'm going to make one more puddle of white, and I'm going to do this one last time. And then we're going to have a puddle of pure white that we're not going to mix anything into. So I've got not the pure white, but the almost pure white. The first step away from white in my brush, and I'm going to start with this one right here in front. And I'm just going to load it right onto my canvas. And we're going to work one pumpkin bump at a time. When you're doing the top part, if you want it like the inspiration piece, don't touch the stem. Make sure that there's a gap there.
Don't touch the stem, make sure there's a little bit down.
I'm pulling mine in a downward motion from tip to bottom. And then we're going to work the other direction with the darker color. I would say probably not my darkest one, but second to darkest. We're going to start with that one. I'm going to load a little bit on my brush. I'm going to start at the bottom and pull it up into the white to blend. And I'm pulling it pretty far into the white because I want the color to come up, and it will blend itself automatically the more strokes you do. And just feather the colors together. And I think that's nice, but I'm going to use my darkest color now. I load a little bit on my brush and do that exact same thing. Pull it from the bottom up. And as you brush over your strokes, it blends together. I'm curving around where that bump is at the bottom, just following it along, brushing up. And because I'm pulling the white paint from up here, it blends itself together. You can even turn your brush sideways where it's pointed like that and feather the colors even more. I'm just moving my brush back and forth. And clean all that white out of my brush. Not completely, but give it a good rinse. And I'm gonna go for my black, my darkest color. Not too much, because black is very dense. And I'm just kind of wiggling it into the shadows at the very bottom of that pumpkin bump. And as my brush keeps going over the same strokes, it's pulling that wet paint, that lighter gray, and it blends everything together. I'm adding some shadow of this dark gray that was created when I put black at the bottom, right along the edges to add dimension. And just keep working with the color. I'm working with black, just the tiniest bit on my brush. And my brush is fairly dry. So I dip it and then I brush the excess off to dry it just a little, and I feather it in. And just an afterthought, if you feel like you've gone too far outside the line or your line is messy like mine is, because we have a pure black background, once your pumpkin's dry, if you go very carefully right around the edge with a fine tip brush in black, you'll clean up that line and it'll look like a masterpiece. So I've rinsed my brush, I'm happy with my shading. I'm going to pull a little bit, I'm going to put a little bit of metallic gold on my paint palette, and we're going to work that in while the paint's still wet. So I'm using my same flat tip brush. I'm going to grab a little bit on my bristles, dust off the excess, and work that in. My brush is almost dry, so it feathers it in. It's hard to capture. Oh, almost. It's hard to tell. But you do it to the amount that you like. If you're using silver, it works the exact same way. Just work that metallic color into your painting. Love it. All right, I'm rinsing the metallic out of my brush, and we're gonna do that same thing on the next pumpkin bump. I'm gonna start with the lightest color that I made. It has a little tiny bit of gray in it. And we're going to start on this next one. Now if you'll notice in the inspiration piece, there's a clear dividing line of black in between the pumpkin bumps. So make sure that when you're adding paint on this side, not to go too close to this pumpkin bump. Work very carefully. And this one also doesn't touch the stem. By keeping the pumpkin bumps completely separate, it saves us a lot of effort of trying to blend shadows into those creases. All right, I've got the top half of my pumpkin bump painted. I'm going to go in with the second to darkest color. I'm going to start at the bottom and pull it up. I'm being really cautious with this pumpkin bump and the colors that I'm using because I don't want to go too dark. With the black background, if you start with your shadows really, really dark, it won't pop off the canvas as much as I want mine to. So I'll start with the lighter shade, and I can always go in with more black later to deepen the contrast of the shadows. But I don't want to start off too dark. I think it's easier to add shadows than it is to add highlights sometimes. I'm following the curve of the pumpkin bump and pulling it up in a backwards C motion. And once I have that blended how I want it, I take my next darkest, well actually the darkest color that I blended, and we're going to start at the very bottom. In that same motion, we're going to pull it straight up and then swoop it up. And the more times you put your brush over the same stroke, the more it will blend itself together. If you feel like that deep dark color has grabbed too much of the white from above, wipe the paint out of your brush on your paper towel, grab more dark color, and keep going over the same spots until it's as dark as you want it. And if it's not quite dark enough, feather in some just pure black. I'm using the next to darkest color that I've made, and I'm going to edge around this crease or the divide between pumpkin bumps very carefully. So I'm gonna feather in the color, but I want to deposit the paint right along there. Short strokes and working it in back and forth, pulling it out into the rest of my pumpkin. Just feather it back and forth. When you get your shading about where you want it, you can rinse your brush, dry it off. I like to pinch the water out of my brush. Load a little bit of that metallic into it, and put it right in your pumpkin. And I'm using just the littlest bit every time I go to load my brush. I don't want it to spread too far or to blend over the shadows, but I want it to be a part of the shadows. Just so when you walk by it, the metallic captures your eye and goes, "Ooh, that's a pretty painting." So we're going to continue that technique for all of our pumpkins, all of our pumpkin bumps. I'm going to jump to this tiny one in the back. If you want to move around in order, go for it. I'm doing the exact same thing that I did on the other ones, but this one, I probably won't use much black. I might use some shadows. And if you're having trouble navigating into this little area with your flat brush, switch to your round brush. Okay, so for this little guy back here, I've shaded with my second to darkest color and my second to lightest color. I've shaded right around the edge here and right here at this tip. And at the widest part, I'm going to go back through is this center oval right here. Because I imagine that's where the light is hitting it. I want that area to pop off the canvas. I'm going to keep going over the same areas because that's how the blends work. It mixes the paint while it's on the canvas. So for this little guy up in the back, I put the darkest color that I've made right here into the tip, and I've blended it in a little bit. So I think the shadow of the stem falling over, it's going to make this one darker than this one over here. And this is just how I imagine the light is going to hit the pumpkin. And I'm kind of scribbling this paint together, just blending it in. got my little guys done. I'm going to switch back to my half-tip flat brush. And I'm just going to continue working. I'm going to try and speed up a little bit so I don't keep y'all much past 3. Alright, so I've painted this guy just white, and I switched to move over to this one. I painted the top half of this one white, and the bottom half I jumped to using my darkest color that I made to paint from the bottom up. Because this one has a pretty large shadow on it, this area here. And that's what I'm trying to mimic, that deep dark shadow. And when I get the blend just how I want it, I'm pulling the shadow up along the crease too. But when I get my blend just how I want it, I work in that metallic color.
Okay.
All right, so the pumpkin stem is about the same technique. It's definitely got more gold in it. But I think we're gonna work with darker colors. So I'm going to switch to my fine tip round brush. And I'm going to turn my canvas around and work backwards so I don't run the risk of putting my hand in the paint. So I'm going to start going right around the edge of the stem, because that's where the darkest area is. And again, I'm not going to touch my pumpkin bumps. And I'm not going to fill it in. I'm going just right around the edge. You'll see that okay? Okay. And I'm not going to fill it in completely, but I'm going to take some more of the darkest gray that I made and pull it almost closed, but not all the way closed. So I'm going to go in with the lightest gray, and we're going to blend those colors together. And I'm scrubbing along where the white and that gray met in kind of a circular back and forth motion. And we're just working that color together. I'm gonna brush the paint, I'm gonna wipe off the brush onto my paper towel, load it with that white, or almost white again, put it right back over the same spot. I'm going to scrub around the edges again. And I'm going to do that one final time, but this last time, where I put the white, I'm going to isolate it, and I'm going to leave it alone, because that's my highlight. So you can see where the light's hitting just that section of stem. Now I'm going to go back with the metallic color. This time I'm going to put a little bit more on my brush than I did before, but I'm going to be gentle when I place it on the paint. Allow my brush to pick up some of the wet paint that's on the canvas. I'm using a very gentle touch. And I'm scrubbing that gold into the dark gray area, just like I did the white, but it's in reverse. I think my stem needs to be a little bit darker, so I'm taking some dark gray and a little bit of black right along the edges, just to darken it. And I feel like my stem's almost the same color as my pumpkin bumps, and I want it to be darker. I'm taking the black around the pumpkin stem, and I'm working it into the lighter gray color that's already wet and on my canvas. All right, so you have to decide when you're doing your swoopty swoop, which one's gonna go in front and which one's gonna go behind. So I like this one in front, so I'm going to cross over this area, and that one's gonna pull it into the foreground. And I'm crossing over with gold.
Yep.
Now, if you want the other one in the foreground, you'll cross over this way. But I'm crossing this way. And I've made a swoop right here with gold. And I'm gonna highlight the inside of this swoop right at the crest at the bottom with gold, because that's where the light's gonna hit it. I'm detailing this vine very gently with the tip of my fine round brush. That's where my light's hitting. That's what I want to highlight.
And is that golds also?
It's still gold, yes ma'am. All right, once I have it outlined in gold, I'm gonna add a leaf, and I think I'll put a leaf right here. I'm using my darkest gray that I've made, and I'm just gonna put a leaf shape in. A little point. So I still have the darkest gray that I made on my brush, and I just picked up a little bit of white. It's still wet. I'm gonna pull from the tip of the leaf into the middle. And I'm wiping the excess paint off of my brush onto my paper towel, and I'm gonna go back with a dry brush. Grab some gold. I'm gonna put it right at the top. So I'm gonna add some highlights in my swoopy swoop now, and I don't want it to be just too poppy. So I'm gonna use the second to darkest gray that I made, if I can find some wet spots still. My puddles have dried up. And I'm gonna go below my gold line. Ever so gently, I'm just depositing just a little bit of color, just enough to add some dimension. I'm gonna do it up here too, where I think the light's gonna hit. Anywhere that you feel like it needs to pop off the canvas a little bit. There's some of this color in it. Now I'm using the lightest color that I've made, the one that's almost pure white, and I'm gonna fix that highlight. I've loaded my brush and I'm working in an up and down motion, and I'm kind of scrubbing it into the canvas. Most of the paint in this area of this stem is dry. And I've rinsed my brush to rinse off the excess. I'm drying it on my paper towel. And we're gonna scrub it in some more. I like it a lot. Okay, then I'm gonna finish it off with some gold accent. And I'm scrubbing that into the canvas as well. So I've put the paint on the canvas, wiped off the excess on my paper towel, and I'm just working it in. In the inspiration piece, there's a vine that goes off this way. And we're gonna kind of just do the same thing. I'm gonna use the darkest gray that I have to outline where I want it to go. I'm gonna make some leaves. I'm gonna accent with gold and highlight with that light gray color. And I'm using that same dark gray color just to map out where I want my leaves to go. These leaves are going to be just a little different. And some of these leaves are just golden white, You can see that? And we blended that one over there for a lot more. And again, we're not trying to make it look exactly like the inspiration piece. We're making it look like our own. I'm working some lighter gray, the lightest gray that I have, into this sleeve. And that light color on top, and accent it with gold. So just continue making leaves until you're satisfied. All right, so I've got all my leaves done. Yay, paint everywhere today. I'm going to use the lightest gray that I made. I'm loading just the tip of my brush. Oh wait, we did this, started with gold, and then we did the white. I'm going to load the gold into my brush. I'm going to drag it right along the vine, right along the top. Right where I think the sun's going to hit. I'm going to clean my brush really good. The last thing I want to show you is how to clean up your edges. And because you painted your your background black, if you take just pure black and follow right along your pumpkin edge, when it dries, it's going to look perfect. So I have messy edges. I'm taking that black and I'm working slowly but carefully right around that bottom. All right, I've got 2 more pumpkin bumps. And we will be done with our masterpiece. Are you excited? All right, I've got mine all done. There's one little area that I see that I need to blend it just a little better. I'm gonna throw some metallic gold over it and call it good. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. And oh, I almost forget every time. Let me show you what we're gonna do next month. A tree. You can do it like this one to look like the cherry blossoms that fall at this time. Or if you feel so inclined, you can do fall colors. And I've added those to the material list. You need orange, yellows, greens. We'll need browns, red, white, and black. And then the same brushes. This time we're going to add Q-tips to make the leaves in a stippling motion. So if you have Q-tips, several of them you'll need. If you have a rubber band lying around, grab that too. But you don't have to have the rubber band. You could do it with just 1 or 2 Q-tips in your hand at once. All right, that's all I have for you today. And
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.